Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for Captain America issue 29. And I thought this was kind of a weird issue to lead us into the ending of this creative team's run. I say that because we essentially run into some places where the plot demands that certain things happen, and it's just like, okay. Now, granted, I like what they're trying to talk about in pretty much the big head kind of moments of what Cap and his group are trying to do. It's just the setting up of that is a little bit messier to my taste than I usually would like. So we start off, strangely enough, having Sin and Alexa pretty much walking around in the woods. Sin is pretty much saying, "Hey, your plan pretty much was a good idea. And it was pretty much funny to poison him and have him like as a slab of meat and laugh all that." However, Alexa decides to summon like demon shit and just like attack her because evidently her like psychic powers or whatnot have been locked away for shit, and that she's doing this to bring that out of her. And Sin at first is like, "No, don't hurt me," and then suddenly awakens to her powers again and blasts him, and she's like, "Ah, no, no, we're good." And they have like a kind of daughter mommy kind of relationship. It's really kind of weird, and I think more work needed to be done to make that seem more believable. But the thing is that Sin is the Red Skull's daughter. You have to really work deeply to sell that kind of attachment because she really doesn't normally do that to what I've seen. So it was just a weird kind of turn for me, and I think that it could have been pretty good if they had worked a little bit longer to do that as an objective for this arc and for this kind of story. So it's like, all right. Now, granted, I am not as versed with her character, Sin's character, as I like. So I was like, okay, this psychic power kind of came out of left field, and then Alexa's able to like summon like demon things or like other extra dimensional creatures, and I'm like, why the fuck hasn't she been using this? Why the fuck would she be having like people that could not be useful to her cause when you could just be like, "Rah," and like chains and shit? And I'm just like, what? It gets into an issue of like the plot demands that certain things happen, and honestly, there probably could have been better ways to do it without being like, why hadn't she been using that shit kind of before in other situations? The plot demands it because we're getting at the end and we gotta do some shit. So, we shift over to Cap and friends, pretty much talking out what's kind of going on. We see pretty much Baron von Strucker being brought in by Susan Storm, and they're like, alright, he'll face the law and everything, and we're kind of getting back to normal, and we pretty much have Nick Fury Jr. and the rest of the Daughters of Liberty and Thunderbolt Ross pretty much trying to figure out what they should do. And it's a pretty kind of complicated problem because Russia's not going to extradite the Lukens. But they need to be taken out because of all the shenanigans that they've been doing. And we have the moral quandaries of how do we handle this thing? Because Steve wants to do it the right way of not murdering them and not assassinating them. Whereas the Dry is like, oh, we should pretty much like throw that shit out and fucking get this done. Thunderbolt Ross, of course, bringing up like the whole going in and kind of like messing around with the country. What about their kind of rights kind of thing? Which was an interesting kind of thing to bring that up, but it's like, okay, these people are fundamentally flaunting the law and everything, and of course Ross brings up that he's wondering if this is being done because it's right or because of Cap's bruised ego, and that's a valid point to bring up, and I like how Steve handles it, being like, yeah, it is kind of personal for me, but not in the way of that I got my ass beat. It's everything that they've done to America, all the kind of things that they've done in their quest to grab power. And even Dryad bringing up that they've got the Lukens because of the contracts. So like, yeah, they can do plumbing, but that doesn't give them the right to wiretap my phone. And Fury's like, ooh, that's actually a good one. Thank you for that. But Cap makes a valid argument. It's like, listen, we got to do this right. We got to do this the right way. He still believes in the dream, and he wants to make sure that they get brought to justice because they've done horrible things to people and they need to be brought in for that. But the thing is, if you keep doing things their way, you'll eventually look up and be those people. And that's a very valid point on Cap's point. So they start getting everything kind of set up. We get White Tiger kind of brought into the fold again to kind of help out. So they kind of split up into two teams. They've got Cap going on for Alexander, and his part is pretty much just done to him going in and fighting some watchdog people. I'm like, okay, that's kind of strange, but deal with it. We also see that Sharon decides to go to the Kingpin and give him some information on, like, Alexa's movements and everything, because she knows that he would want payback. Alexa has threatened him and just decides to give him the information. Because their whole plan was that Fury give them the intel that they need, just pretty much whereabouts, movements, and all that, and they'll go in and do the rest pretty much. So Wilson, having all this information as well, decides to get in contact with someone, and it's like, all right, let's kind of do this shit. So we see that Alexa and Sin are kind of like at a swanky ass place, and they're deciding to go in. They pretty much have a gas kind of thing going on. Bucky's pretty much trying to do his thing with Sin. White Tiger is pretty much taking out some supports. Dryad decides to focus on Alexa, and she's like, yeah, let's do this. And then a sniper shot cracks out and hits Alexa in the head, and she like goes down. Of course, then Sin goes and psychic powers Bucky out, and it's like, oh no, mommy, and then like teleports. It's like, the fuck is going on here? I understand utilizing different kind of powers and everything, and having surprising shit happen, but it's just like, why the fuck is she calling her mommy? They haven't really spent enough time together, or at least have the time shown together to get that kind of reaction, unless Alexa pretty much foresaw these events, which you have to be careful when you're doing that, and is going to, for some reason, utilize Sin's powers to like take over her body and do that. That isn't out of the realm of possibility. That could happen in comics, so we'll kind of have to see how that pans out. Of course, Cap's team trying to take Alexa and Sin are like, what the fuck just happened? Because like, I heard something over the line that justice was served. And I'm thinking that links back to Scourge, who has been a while, and it's like, oh, okay, let's kind of see what's going on here. Because they kind of dealt with it with the one person that was Scourge, but they kind of made it look that, like, potentially Walker, U.S. agent, is either amiable to that kind of thing, or potentially could be doing this kind of thing. I don't know. It's really kind of strange to handle this kind of stuff this late in the game, especially when we've got one last issue left where everything kind of up in the air with this. I'm like, okay. I liked the beginning of this arc because I'm like, okay, power leap, let's kind of see what's going on here. And I didn't mind that it worked on a slower kind of pacing, because that can work out to an advantage within a story. But here, we now see the kind of downside to doing that slow pacing is that if you get to a point where you got to end before you thought you were going to end, you got to start doing some weird shit and have plot demanding things and be like, oh, we're now going to have Sin have her psychic powers back. Why? And that Alexa can do these kind of things, and then Scourge pops up out of nowhere, probably working with Fisk, and we'll just kind of see how this kind of pans out. Not saying that the next issue could be a horrendous one. It could wrap up things well enough to be like, okay, that kind of makes better sense, but for the next to the last one, they needed to kind of tighten this up a little bit better. So I didn't like how the plot demanded certain things handling out, but I did like Cap's overall outlook on the situation and how he was going to try and plan everything. Kind of downside is that we only saw him doing that. Granted, that's an important thing, and then just the setup of him just going into Alexander Lukin's fortress. So hopefully that takes up the bulk of it, even though we're probably going to get weird shit going on with Alexa and Sin. So those are my opinions on the issue. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also, like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.